This episode was originally a live conversation which took place at Start Summit 2022.
Hey, you're building a company within the university, and the university is a nonprofit. If you build a commercial business within the university, you can't do that, so we would lose our nonprofit status. So you got to go out.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Severin.
Well, hello everyone. So great to see many faces here. Severin, a very well welcome. You are the co-founder and CTO at Duolingo, probably the world's most popular language learning app. And before we talk about that impressive story, I actually want to start with your personal background. You did study at the ETH here in Switzerland, but then you actually went to the US to do a PhD at Carnegie Mellon. So first of all, why did you decide to go to the US?
Well, so I was a student at ETH in Zurich, and I've always wanted to study in the US for a while. And I participated in an exchange program with Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. That was like the one program that I had with the US. So I went there, and that's actually where I met my co-founder, eventual co-founder, and he convinced me to stay in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon University and pursue a PhD, which was never on my agenda. So I have a PhD now, but I've never wanted to become, have a PhD or become a scientist.
So basically a PhD by accident.
A PhD by
Would you say that this is actually a good choice to become an entrepreneur afterwards, or would you skip that step and jump into entrepreneurship earlier?
So I have to be careful with what I say here, because obviously it worked out for me. But in general, I would say I wouldn't recommend it. So it worked out for me. I never wanted to become, go into academia, and I would say you should only pursue a PhD if you want to become a professor, if you want to go into academia, if you really want to become a scientist or a researcher, then that is the right choice, and that's probably the best choice. But if you want to start a company, you really don't need a PhD, especially in computer science.
But you wouldn't wish that you did that differently, looking back.
No, otherwise there would be no Duolingo. Yeah, so
exactly.
That's how it happened. Yeah.
So please talk a bit more about how you met your co-founder, Luis.
Yeah, it's actually a funny story. So when I went there, before I left, I talked to a bunch of professors at ETH, and it's like, who are like the people I should talk to at Carnegie Mellon? And I had a list, and one of those people on the list was Luis Fonan, my co-founder and CEO of Duolingo. And one day I just walked into his office, and it's like, hey, I'm Severin hacker, and he was like, okay, who are you? Yeah. And I was Severin hacker, like that's my name, Severin Bevadaji. And he was like, oh, okay, let's talk. So that's how I met him, and we started working together on a research project. Yeah.
And actually, one of these projects was a computer science project. So that's how Duolingo originally started. Can you talk about these early days?
Yeah, the early days, it was interesting. So we had this research project, which was we got a grant from National Science Foundation, an NSF grant, so it was a research grant to pursue an idea that was, Luis and my idea, and it just got bigger and bigger. And at some point, the university actually kicked us out of the university and said, "Hey, you're building a company within the university, and the university is a nonprofit. If you build a commercial business within the university, you can't do that, so we would lose our nonprofit status. So you got to go out." So they kicked us out, and we had to raise money from venture capitalists, and that's how we raised our first round.
So was that then also basically when you decided, hey, now we're going to pursue this really as a business opportunity, when the university kicked you out, basically?
Yeah, they kind of kicked us out. Yeah, we were too big.
Crazy. And what happened then? So you said, okay, we are out of university, so you probably also lost all the perks that the university gave you, like free rooms and stuff. So you needed to raise venture capital money. What did you do to make that happen?
Yeah, so we raised venture capital. Our first round, there was a Series A, which was relatively small compared to today. And that basically funded the business. So we left university, and we just took an office very close to the university. And basically everyone who worked at Duolingo was a Carnegie Mellon student, or associated with Carnegie Mellon. So that was the funding, and it was actually hard to raise that first round, but it worked because my co-founder, he had 2 previous exits, successful exits. He had 2 companies that he sold to Google. So they believed in his track record, and it all worked out.
So he was on the VC map to get funded again.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you were in Pittsburgh. You still are today.
Yep.
You didn't go to Silicon Valley, so I can imagine that this made things even a bit more difficult, despite the track record of your co-founder, to raise money.
It made it a little bit more difficult, and we actually we did the Sand Hill Road tour. Like in Silicon Valley, there's like this road, Sand Hill Road, where all the VCs are. And we went there, Luis and I, and we talked to all of these investors, and they were like quite excited actually. And many of them wanted to invest, but they always ended with like, "When are you going to move here?" And we were like, "No, we're actually not moving." And you could see like they look at their watch and like, "All right." So that was hard, but we eventually raised money from a VC on the East Coast that didn't care about us being in Pittsburgh, Square Ventures.
It's crazy that this is still was a deal breaker back then to not invest in your company.
It was a deal breaker back then. Funnily, like later, some of these investors that rejected us came back and said, invested in later rounds.
Okay, so they fixed the mistake early on. Yeah. So let's also talk about Duolingo, actually, what you do. So before Duolingo, language learning was quite boring and also expensive. What do you do, or did you do differently back in the days?
Yeah, so we had an early observation, which is like, what is actually the hardest part? What is actually the hardest thing about learning a language? Like, what do you think is the hardest?
I'd probably lose my motivation along the way.
Exactly. So motivation is like the hardest part for most people. Like, Duolingo is an app. We can't force you to use Duolingo. It's not a school or anything. So early on, we realized like the main reason why people fail at learning languages is because they give up. So from day one, we made sure that the Duolingo experience is as gamified and as fun as possible. So we invested tons of resources, and we ran hundreds and hundreds of A/B experiments to make the experience as engaging as possible. So make it fun, make it gamified, and that's kind of like the reason why I think we have way higher retention than all other apps in the education sector.
And I can tell you it's working, because whenever I call my mom, she says, "Oh, I'm on this Duolingo strike. I don't want to lose it. I have to hang up and go and train my language skills." So I also wonder, you have a free business model, so people can use the app completely free of charge. What are the challenges behind that if you offer something for free, but of course you still have all the development and marketing efforts that go into the product and the sales, basically?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Duolingo's mission is to provide the best education and make it universally accessible. So not just languages, but all kinds of education. But what's interesting is that the next question is usually like, how do you make money? Like, exactly. If you give all the content away for free, like, how do you make money? And probably most of our competitors, they offer like one lesson for free and then they charge. But Duolingo, the content is actually completely free. Like, you can access 100% of the content within Duolingo for all the languages. And that's part of our mission. We wanted to make sure that people, no matter their background, no matter their socioeconomic status, can learn languages, especially English, right? Which is like an unlock for many people in the world. And so we struggled with this a lot, because our investors would ask, well, how are you going to make money? And for a long time, it's like, we're just going to grow and grow and grow, and then at some point we'll figure it out. And today we actually have a freemium model. So we have a free product that is shows a little bit of advertising, and then there's a paid product, a subscription, where you can subscribe and it has a bunch of extra features. So it removes advertising, and it has a bunch of extra features that allow you to learn a little bit faster. But it's the same content, so nobody's locked out, and we really care about that.
What gave you the confidence to go down that path and really say, we offer everything for free, basically, of course, ad revenue, etc., but the core product is free and usable, versus doing what your competitors do? Was it really just a mission-driven focus?
It was just a mission-driven focus, and we hired people who bought into the mission. So if we had just like pivoted and it's like, we're going to do what everyone else does and just charge up front, I think we would have lost 90% of our employees because they believed in this mission and still believe in this mission, and I still believe in this mission, and everybody believes, hopefully,
right,
in this mission.
And you also mentioned that you have the subscription revenue, but also the ad-based revenue. How do they compare? Which one is more important to you?
Yeah, so today it's probably more than 80% comes from the subscription, and the rest is advertising.
You briefly also touched upon the A/B testing, the experiments that you constantly run at the huge scale. How are you even able to pull that off? I mean, that's a massive technical skill that you need to develop there.
Yeah, good thing. So we run these A/B experiments. You have the two conditions control experiment, and we look which one is better. And we run hundreds of these in parallel. So each one of you, like if you open Duolingo, we actually see slightly different versions of Duolingo because we're in different buckets, different conditions of these experiments. And that's kind of like that process and that technology that we have built to make this happen is the secret sauce of Duolingo. There's not a single A/B experiment that's like, oh yeah, that one is like, that's why we're like better than the other ones. Right. It's like the combination of them. And the process and the tooling that we have at Duolingo that allows us to run these A/B experiments. So we have a team, for example, 10 people that just work on the tooling so that anyone in the company can run these experiments. So any engineer, any product manager can say like, hey, I want to test this feature versus that feature, or this feature versus control. And we'll make it really easy for them to do this and then also analyze the results.
Amazing.
So it's, people make the right decisions based on data.
This talk is supported by Small PDF, the successful Swiss scale-up making PDF easy for over 1 billion people around the world since 2013. You may remember them from a previous podcast we hosted with their CEO, Dennis Just. Their mission is to make PDFs and life easy for people across the world, a mission made possible with their 90+ amazing employees across Zurich, Belgrade, and Barcelona. If you want to join this fast-growing Swiss scale-up, visit smallpdf.com/Swisspreneur and apply.
And I know this probably depends on the experiment, but what KPIs do you focus on during these experiments?
Yeah, in general, we look at 3 things. One is like, how well does it teach? Number 2 is how engaging is it? Like, do we retain people better with this experiment? Mm-hmm. For example, so retention basically. And number 3 is monetization. And obviously, we want to have experiments that are good for all 3. Sometimes they're good for one and neutral for the others. But that's the 3 things we care about.
And do you have an example that you can share with us as like one of the key learnings that came out of such an A/B experiment?
Key learning, as I said, it's the combination that makes it that makes it succeed. But like even what's interesting with the A/B experiments is like even small changes can have big effects. Even now, so even like changing the copy, for example, on the subscription page can yield like big returns. Just even like single words.
Crazy.
Yep.
I also want to talk about a few challenges along the way of building Duolingo. The first one, language learning, that's quite a crowded space. So there's lots of competition. How do you think or react to competition?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. At Duolingo, we kind of ignore competition, and we see like that our competitors, they obsess over Duolingo and they copy us, copy features, and we obsess over users. Like we rarely talk about competitors. We mostly talk about users and data and experiments and how can we teach better, and how can we teach more. That's like what we are obsessed over.
I really like that take because a lot of early entrepreneurs, they get obsessed over their competitors and just want to do what they do or want to be better than them. You just don't really seem to care. Is it really that data-driven approach that allows you to do that?
Yep. That's actually we have these operating principles at Duolingo, and the first one is learners first, which is the most important operating principle. It's very similar to Amazon's customer first, but yeah, we care about users and learners.
And of course, you've also had massive growth. So from starting as a computer science project, you now employ more than 500 people at Duolingo. And I also want to talk about these growth challenges. First of all, user acquisition. That's, of course, a big one because that's basically what you live from. So how do you acquire and win new users for Duolingo?
It's interesting. Most of it is organic. It's just people, they discover Duolingo, word of mouth. People share it with their friends. It's one of those things when you have an engaging product, a really high quality product, people will just share it with their friends. So we don't pay for acquisition much. We do have a small marketing budget, and we do have marketing people as well, and we do spend some money on the acquisition of users. But the vast majority is basically word of mouth, and the product speaks for itself.
Well, talking about the product market fit or product hook, that's exactly what you wish for, right? So then I also want to talk about your personal role. I can imagine from when you started in the early days as CTO, your day probably looks a bit different today with 500 employees. Can you talk about that transition, how it looked in the early days, your daily routines and jobs, and what you're focusing on today?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think my job role has changed every single year. So at first I was, basically implementing Duolingo, like I was writing code.
Right.
And then, I moved more towards like reviewing other people's code. And then it became more, system architecture. And then it was more like reviewing system architecture. And then at some point it turned more into hiring and managing. And now I probably spend like 50% of my time with hiring software engineers, but also other roles, the executive team, board members, etc. So.
And how do you train personally and also grow into these different roles? If that role changes every year, how do you keep up with that?
That's a good question. So I got to say, we had early on, a couple of years in actually, we hired a person who's now our SVP of engineering, and I learned a ton from her. Like I was not a manager, I didn't know how to manage, I didn't know how to do it, but I learned a lot from her, and she's absolutely great.
So having people around you who've actually done it and who you can learn from to train and help you.
Exactly, hire the people to learn from.
Yeah. And I also wonder, with a growing company, you have more employees, you have also more investors and more customers, of course. Is there also an increasing pressure that you felt with the growth of the company?
From whom?
From a personal side, that you felt, hey, now it's even more important that I do a good job and that you can handle everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a sense of responsibility for the company, the employees that work at Duolingo, their families, and the users. Obviously, without the customers, there's no company. So yes, and investors too. So all stakeholders matter.
And how did you always stay healthy as a founder? Everybody knows founder life can be quite challenging, also work hour-wise, stress-wise. How did you always stay healthy along the journey?
Yeah, it's I have this principle. I have a bunch of we have these operating principles for the company, and I have a bunch of personal principles. One of them is never compromise with sleep, and I actually started having that during my PhD. I was like, because I saw like other people or other PhD students that just would work so much and work so late, and then compromise on sleep. And I basically I sleep 8 to 9 hours every day. A lot of people are probably jealous of that, but that's the one thing I protect.
I'm curious, how do you then do that? Do you just leave work at the office and say, enough is enough, I go home and sleep now?
Yeah, I mean, I rarely leave the office after 7 p.m. these days, but early on it was a bit more stressful. Yeah.
But I think that's a great role model to have, to see, hey, sleep is important. It can also work with a lot of sleep.
Yep.
Now, I also want to focus on 2021, because that's the year when you actually went public with Duolingo at NASDAQ. And you currently have a market capitalization of around $3.5 billion US. Was going public always the goal for you?
It's not clear. Like early on, it was just a research project, right? We just wanted to have this research project be successful, and then it turned into something bigger. And my co-founder, he actually had 2 previous exits, so he was kind of like financially secure. Me a little bit less, but we always wanted to stay independent. One of our operating principles is take the long view, and when you sell to someone else, like a bigger company, then you kind of lose that, right? So it's like now you basically do what is best for that larger company, versus we're still in control of Duolingo and we can do what we think is best for the long term.
You said staying independent, but you took investors on quite early. Wouldn't that be a contradiction?
No, I wouldn't say that. If you pick the right investors, which we had, the luxury, I think you can align the thing. You can align everything, and I'm very happy with our investors, and I think we have not compromised on our principles.
And can you also share a bit more how you then made the decision and what you did afterwards when you decided to go for IPO? How does that process look like, and how do you strategically build towards that milestone?
Strategically, like you basically tell people that your plan is to go public, because people, especially employees, they ask you like, what is your exit strategy? Like, how do I, ever make money from the stock options you give me?
Right.
And we just told them, like, we were just very transparent. It's like, look, the plan is to IPO. We can't guarantee when it happens. Just take the long view. We are all taking the long view. And if this is not for you, then go work somewhere else. But this is like the position we took.
And why was a trade sale not a better option compared to going IPO?
What do you mean trade sale? Like
to sell the company to someone else?
Like get acquired, or
yeah, exactly.
That again, like that, then we would lose the independence, and we wanted to keep the independence. Yeah. The other thing, by the way, is also that at some point it becomes too expensive to get acquired, right? So the potential acquirers, need to be really, really big to afford us.
Absolutely. Now, of course, everybody asks himself, after this huge success, going public at NASDAQ, having a booming business, what is next for Duolingo, and also for you personally? What else do you want to tackle and achieve?
Yeah, I mean, the way we see it is like we're still like in the early days. As I said, our mission is to provide the best education and make it universally accessible. It's not just language learning, but even within language learning, we see just huge potential. I think we can teach much better to much higher levels of fluency in the next couple of years. And then we also want to expand to other areas of education, for example, math or learning the first language. Literacy. Yeah.
So it still feels, although you just closed your IPO last year, you're still like at the beginning.
Yep.
That's impressive. So to wrap up to today's conversation, I have some rapid fire questions for you. So I either give you different options to choose from or a quick question, and I'm really excited to hear your answers. You ready?
Okay.
How many languages do you personally speak?
Yeah, so 3.5, I would say.
Which are those?
Well, German, English, some French, and a little bit of Spanish.
And which language would you most like to speak or be able to speak?
Probably Chinese, but it's so hard to learn.
Why Chinese? Because it's an interesting business opportunity, or
a lot of speakers,
yeah.
And I think it's a very different language from the European languages. So,
from your perspective, what needs to be gamified next?
What needs to be gamified next? I'm not sure about that.
You can.
I mean, the things like for example, health. Like Duolingo is actually similar. Like motivation, is similar to like health apps and fitness apps and all that. But they're already gamified, mostly.
But for some people, they still don't work. So I think there's still room for improvement.
Yeah. So Duolingo for health.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what else do you wish you could A/B test?
Government policies, it's interesting that we just went through this COVID thing, and we don't really know like what government policies actually work best, right? Because we don't have a clean A/B test. We only have one country does this, but they might have completely different environment or context, and the other country does this, and we say, oh, this country did better than the other one, but we don't know why, because we don't have clean A/B experiments.
I'd love to see that in action. Who's your favorite investor in Switzerland?
Is that a planted question? Wingman Ventures.
And the last question for you, Switzerland or the United States?
In terms of what?
Overall choice, everything combined.
Everything. That's you can't ask that.
Okay, then tell us your choice for Switzerland and when you would choose the United States.
I mean, Switzerland is my home, and probably will forever be my home. But the US is great for entrepreneurship. It's great for starting companies. Great for business. I love the US too.
So you're gonna stay in the US for just a little longer, I guess. Then.
Probably.
Severin, time is flying. We're already on the clock. So thank you so much for joining, and all the best for the future. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.